Alright, let's just dive right in. I want you to think about the last time someone said something to you, maybe a comment, maybe a critique, maybe just a tone in their voice, and you carried it with you for the rest of the day. You replayed it in the shower. You thought about it while you were trying to sleep. You built entire arguments in your head responding to something this person said 3 days ago. And you know what the wildest part of that is? You probably didn't even like that person that much. They didn't matter to you. And yet they lived rent-free in your head for 72 hours. Sound familiar? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why that happens, the actual neuroscience behind it, and more importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do to stop it. Because not every voice deserves your energy. And today, I want to give you the science to back that up, so it's not just a motivational poster on your wall, it's something you actually believe and can act on. So let's start at the very beginning. Let's talk about the brain. Your brain right now is doing something extraordinary. It's processing roughly 11 million bits of information every single second. 11 million. And you know how many of those bits you're consciously aware of? About 40. 40 bits per second make it into your conscious awareness. Everything else is filtered, sorted, categorized, and stored by systems in your brain that you have almost zero conscious access to. Now, one of the most important systems doing that filtering is a tiny almond-shaped structure deep in your temporal lobe called the amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's threat detection center. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to keep you alive in an environment where threats were physical predators, enemies, falling rocks. Its whole job is to scan your environment, find anything that looks like a threat, and trigger a cascade of stress hormones that prepare your body to fight or run. Here's the problem. The amygdala doesn't know the difference between a lion chasing you through the savannah and your coworker making a sarcastic comment in a meeting. To your amygdala, social threats and physical threats register in almost identical ways. When someone criticizes you, dismisses you, humiliates you, or simply makes you feel like you don't belong, your amygdala fires. Your cortisol spikes. Your heart rate goes up. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking, long-term planning part of your brain, gets partially taken offline. Researchers call this amygdala hijack, and it explains so much about why we do what we do in moments of emotional intensity. It explains why you said something you regretted in an argument. It explains why you froze when you were criticized publicly. And it explains why that one comment from a person you barely respect still managed to ruin your whole afternoon. Because biologically, your brain flagged it as a threat, and your nervous system responded accordingly. Now here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little uncomfortable. Social pain and physical pain share neural pathways. There was a landmark study done at UCLA, led by researcher Naomi Eisenberger, where participants were put in an fMRI scanner and made to play a virtual ball-tossing game with what they thought were 2 other players. At some point during the game, the other 2 players just stopped throwing the ball to the participant. They were excluded, left out of the game, and when the researchers looked at the brain scans, they saw activation in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that lights up when you experience physical pain. Social exclusion literally hurts. Not metaphorically, neurologically. In the same structures, with measurable overlap, and this makes evolutionary sense. For our ancestors, being excluded from the group was a death sentence. You needed the tribe to survive, to hunt, to stay warm, to protect each other from predators. So the brain evolved to make social rejection feel like physical injury, because that's how seriously it needed you to take it. The problem is we're no longer living in tribes on the savannah. We're living in cities, with social media, with thousands of strangers who can comment on our lives at any moment, and our amygdala hasn't caught up. It's still treating every piece of social feedback like it has life or death implications. So when someone leaves a cruel comment on your post, or your aunt makes a passive-aggressive remark at dinner, or your manager dismisses your idea in front of the whole team, your ancient prehistoric brain is treating that like survival-level information, and that's why it's so hard to just let it go. But here's the key insight, and this is the thing I really want you to sit with. Not all voices carry equal weight in your nervous system. Even if your amygdala initially treats them the same way, your cortex, once it comes back online, has the ability to evaluate the source. And whether or not you consciously do that evaluation determines whether you carry that voice for hours or release it in minutes. Brené Brown, who has spent decades researching vulnerability and shame, talks about this in terms of what she calls the square squad. The idea being that if you can't fit the names of the people whose opinions genuinely matter to you on a small piece of paper, a square piece of paper, then you've probably been letting too many voices into your inner circle. And this isn't just a nice philosophical idea. There's actual cognitive science behind the value of source evaluation. Researchers studying credibility assessment have found that when we consciously ask ourselves questions like, does this person have real expertise? Do they know my context? Are they speaking from a place of goodwill? The prefrontal cortex becomes more engaged. We literally move from a reactive, threat-based neural state to a more evaluative, rational one. The act of asking, does this voice deserve my energy, is itself a neurological intervention. Let's talk about the concept of emotional contagion for a minute, because I think this is one of the most underappreciated forces shaping our daily lives. Emotional contagion is the tendency for humans to unconsciously synchronize their emotional states with the people around them. It happens through micro-expressions, the tiny, fleeting facial expressions we make in fractions of a second. It happens through tone of voice, body posture, even the rhythm of someone's breathing. We are wired to catch feelings from each other. It's a feature, not a bug. It's the foundation of empathy. It allows us to feel what others feel, to respond appropriately, to bond. But in the context of toxic or draining relationships and interactions, emotional contagion becomes a liability, because you can sit down with someone who is chronically negative, anxious, or cynical, and walk away 20 minutes later feeling like the world is ending even if nothing in your own life has changed. This is not weakness. This is neurology. There's a class of neurons called mirror neurons, first discovered in macaque monkeys by Giacomo Rizolati's team in Parma, Italy in the 1990s. These neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action. They're part of the system that allows us to simulate the internal states of others, and through mechanisms connected to this system, when we're around people who are suffering, angry, or anxious, our own nervous systems begin to mirror that experience. So when I say not every voice deserves your energy, I'm also saying not every emotional state deserves to be imported into your nervous system. Because the person who is chronically bitter, constantly catastrophizing, always looking for what's wrong, they are not just expressing their internal world to you. They are, in a very real biological sense, attempting to transfer it. And you have the right, actually, I'd argue, the neurological responsibility to have some filters in place. Now let's talk about what emotional boundaries actually are, because I think the word boundaries has been so overused in the self-help world that it's kind of lost its teeth. People hear boundaries, and they think of affirmations on Instagram. They think of saying no to plans on Friday night, and sure, that's part of it. But emotional boundaries are something deeper and more structural than that. An emotional boundary is essentially a rule about what you allow to define your internal state. Notice I said define, not affect. Affect is inevitable. You're human. Things are going to affect you. Someone you care about is going to say something that stings. A project you worked hard on is going to get criticized. Life is going to generate friction. The goal is not to become a robot who feels nothing. The goal is to distinguish between information and invasion. Let me say that again. The goal is to distinguish between information and invasion. Some voices bring you information. They know you. They care about you. They're speaking with some combination of expertise and goodwill. When they offer feedback, even critical feedback, it lands differently. It can sting, but it doesn't destabilize you, because somewhere in your nervous system you know it's coming from a place of investment. Other voices are invaders. They don't know your context. They don't have your well-being in mind. They're projecting. They're venting. They're dealing with their own pain, and you happen to be a convenient surface for it. And when you let those voices carry the same weight as the first category, when you give them access to your internal landscape, you're not being open-minded or humble. You're being neurologically porous. Psychologist and researcher Dr. Judith Herman, in her foundational work on trauma and recovery, wrote extensively about how survivors of complex trauma often have difficulty with something called stimulus discrimination, the ability to distinguish between past threats and present reality. But I want to borrow this idea and apply it more broadly. Many of us, particularly those who grew up in environments where we were criticized a lot, or where our emotional responses weren't validated, have difficulty with a slightly different kind of discrimination, the ability to distinguish between voices that are qualified to evaluate us and voices that simply feel loud. Loudness is not authority. Confidence is not accuracy. Volume is not truth. And this is genuinely hard for us to internalize because our brains are wired to pay attention to things that are persistent and intense. A voice that keeps coming back, that's emotionally charged, that triggers your threat response. Your nervous system treats that as high-priority information. But urgency and importance are not the same thing. Your brain flags certain inputs as urgent. That doesn't mean they're important. This is the cognitive trap that emotional boundaries help you escape. Let me talk about something called the negativity bias, because it's crucial to understanding why this is so hard. Negativity bias is one of the most well-documented phenomena in psychology. It refers to the fact that negative experiences, negative information, and negative interactions have a disproportionately larger impact on our psychological state than positive ones of equal intensity. Roy Baumeister and colleagues, in a landmark 2001 paper, summarized it simply: bad is stronger than good. In almost every domain of human psychology, learning, memory, emotion, motivation, negative stimuli carry more weight than positive ones. There's an evolutionary reason for this. Again, the brain that paid more attention to threats survived longer than the brain that paid equal attention to threats and rewards. So natural selection gave us a brain that's slightly tilted toward negativity, toward surveillance of what could go wrong, toward remembering the bad more vividly than the good. What does this mean practically? It means that one critical voice can undo the effect of 10 supportive ones. It means that one bad interaction can color your memory of an entire day. It means that the voice of the person who doesn't believe in you can, if you're not careful, drown out every person who does. And this is why emotional boundaries can't just be reactive. You can't just try to shake off bad interactions after they happen. You need proactive structures, intentional choices about whose voices you amplify in your life, and whose you allow to reach you at all. Now let's get practical, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, okay, this is all fascinating, but what do I actually do with this? I want to give you 3 practices, 3 things you can implement not in theory, but in your actual life. These are grounded in research, but they're simple enough to use in real time. The first is what I call the credibility filter. The next time you receive a piece of criticism, feedback, or any message that triggers a stress response in you, before you let it spiral, I want you to ask 3 questions about the source. 1. Does this person have direct, relevant experience with what they're commenting on? Not general opinions, actual experience. 2. Does this person have my well-being in mind, even if imperfectly? Are they coming from care, even if clumsily expressed? Or are they coming from frustration, competition, or their own unprocessed wounds? 3. Would I go to this person for advice on this topic? If someone you've never met online is commenting on your parenting, your career choice, your relationship, would you have ever sought their counsel? If the answer is no, why are you allowing their unsolicited verdict to carry weight? This isn't about arrogance. It's not about closing yourself off to growth or feedback. It's about being appropriately selective with whose evaluation of you gets to take up cognitive and emotional real estate. The credibility filter is a way of training your prefrontal cortex to come back online after an amygdala spike. It gives your rational mind a job to do, and in doing that job, it helps regulate the threat response. The second practice is what I call emotional quarantine. This one is about managing contagion, the emotional contagion we talked about earlier. The idea is simple. Not every relationship or interaction needs the same level of exposure. Think of your emotional energy like an immune system. You don't get rid of your immune system just because it's inconvenient. You also don't expose it to every possible pathogen you can find and hope for the best. You make decisions about exposure based on risk, necessity, and your capacity to handle contact at any given time. Some relationships in your life carry high contagion risk. Maybe it's a family member who is stuck in a loop of negativity. Maybe it's a friend who processes anxiety by externalizing it constantly. Maybe it's a colleague who turns every conversation into a complaint session. These people may not be bad people. They may be people you love, people you have history with, people you're not going anywhere with, but they carry high contagion risk. Emotional quarantine doesn't mean cutting these people off. It means being intentional about your exposure. It might mean you don't call that family member when you're already depleted. It might mean you set a time limit on a difficult conversation. It might mean you check in with yourself before engaging. Am I in a place right now where I can hold my own emotional center through this interaction? This is not selfishness. This is stewardship of your nervous system. And your nervous system is the instrument through which you experience everything: your joy, your creativity, your capacity to love, your ability to show up for the people who need you. You are not being a bad person by protecting it. The third practice is what I call the inner counsel. This is about building something proactive, not just defensive. It's about deliberately identifying and amplifying the voices that deserve space in your internal world. Here's how it works. I want you to think of 3 to 5 people in your life, living or not, real or even figures from history or literature, whose opinion of you, if they were to weigh in on a decision you're facing or a quality you're doubting, would actually matter. People who know you well enough to have informed views. People whose character you respect enough to trust their judgment. People who want good things for you without needing you to stay small for their comfort. Write them down. Keep that list somewhere accessible. The reason this works is because we don't just need to reduce the noise from unhelpful voices. We need to fill that space with something, a vacuum in. Your sense of self-worth doesn't just sit empty, it gets filled by whatever voice is loudest. And if you haven't intentionally cultivated voices of genuine support and clear sight, the loudest voice is often the most critical one. Your inner counsel is your curated source of real feedback. They're the people whose affirmation means something because you know it's not hollow, and whose criticism is worth sitting with because you know it comes from love and clarity. When you're spiraling about a comment from someone who barely knows you, return to your inner counsel. What would they say? What do they actually think? Let that be the counterweight. I want to spend a few minutes talking about something that doesn't come up enough in these conversations, and that's the relationship between emotional boundaries and self-worth. Because here's the thing, and I want to be really honest about this, the reason it's so hard to filter voices is often not that we lack information. It's that we don't actually believe we're worth protecting. If somewhere deep down you believe that criticism might be true, that you are fundamentally not enough, not worthy, not capable, then every critical voice hits a wound that's already open. It doesn't matter if the person criticizing you is credible or not, because you're not really evaluating their credibility. You're using their voice to confirm something you already suspected about yourself. This is what psychologists call confirmation bias applied to self-concept. We seek and amplify information that confirms our existing beliefs about ourselves, and if your existing belief about yourself is negative, you're going to unconsciously give more airtime to voices that reinforce that narrative and dismiss voices that contradict it. This is why emotional boundaries and self-worth are inseparable. You cannot consistently protect what you don't believe deserves protection, and so building emotional boundaries is, in part, a practice of rebuilding self-belief, of saying my internal world has value, my energy has value, my attention is a resource, and not just anyone is entitled to it. There's a concept in cognitive behavioral therapy called cognitive diffusion, developed by Dr. Stephen Hayes as part of acceptance and commitment therapy. The idea is that we tend to fuse with our thoughts to treat them as if they are literal truth, as if they define reality. Diffusion techniques are designed to help you create distance between yourself and a thought, to see it as just a thought, a mental event, rather than an authoritative statement about the world. I want to apply this same idea to external voices. Just as you can diffuse from your own thoughts, you can diffuse from the thoughts and opinions of others. When someone says something that hits you, instead of immediately absorbing it as truth, you can practice inserting a moment of observation. You can notice, okay, someone said that. That's a sentence that happened. What does this person actually know? What is their perspective shaped by? What might they be projecting? What part of this, if any, is genuinely useful information, and what part is noise? This is not dismissiveness. This is discernment. And discernment is a skill, one that takes practice, especially if you've spent a lifetime in environments where the voices around you weren't safe or trustworthy. Let me talk about something called secure attachment for a moment, because I think it's deeply connected to what we're discussing. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and developed further by researchers like Mary Ainsworth and later Mary Main, describes patterns of how people relate to others based on their early experiences of safety and connection. One of the core findings of decades of attachment research is that people with what's called secure attachment, people who developed early in life a sense that they were fundamentally loved and safe, tend to navigate criticism, conflict, and social feedback very differently from people with insecure attachment styles. Securely attached individuals can hear criticism without it threatening their core sense of self. They can sit with disagreement without it feeling like abandonment. They can separate "this person is upset with me right now" from "I am fundamentally unworthy of love." They have, in their internal world, a kind of stable base that doesn't collapse when the social environment gets turbulent. People with insecure attachment, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, often don't have that internal stability. For them, a critical voice doesn't just land as feedback, it echoes. It resonates with something deep and old and tender. And I'm sharing this not to make anyone feel categorized or stuck, because the research on attachment is very clear that these patterns can shift over time. Through relationships, through therapy, through intentional practice, I'm sharing it because it explains why this is genuinely harder for some people than others. If you grew up in an environment where voices around you were unpredictable, harsh, or dismissive, your nervous system learned to treat social feedback as high stakes, because it was. Healing that doesn't happen overnight. But understanding it is the beginning. We're coming toward the end, and I want to leave you with something that I think ties all of this together. There is a quote I keep coming back to, and it's something along these lines: that you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I think about this in the context of emotional energy all the time, because so many of us, especially those of us who are empathetic, who care deeply, who were raised to be accommodating, have been operating on an implicit belief that everyone's emotional needs are equally our responsibility, that every person's unhappiness with us is something we need to fix, that every voice that expresses disappointment or frustration or criticism is a signal that we've done something wrong and we need to change. That's not empathy, that's enmeshment, and it's exhausting. And it's ultimately not even helpful to the people around you, because you cannot sustainably give from a depleted source. The science of emotional boundaries is really the science of sustainable connection. It's not about becoming cold or closed or unreachable. It's about recognizing that your nervous system is a finite resource, that your attention is a finite resource, that your emotional energy is finite, and that how you distribute those resources has real consequences for your mental health, your physical health, your relationships, your capacity to do meaningful work, your ability to show up as the person you want to be. When you stop trying to metabolize every voice equally, something interesting happens. The relationships that actually matter start to breathe more freely. You become more present, more patient, more genuinely available to the people whose voices actually deserve your energy, because you're not pouring yourself out trying to manage everyone else's reactions. And you start to build a relationship with yourself that isn't constantly interrupted. A relationship where your own inner voice, your own sense of what's true, what matters, what you actually think and feel and believe gets to take up a little more space. So here's what I want you to take away from today. Your amygdala is going to fire. You're going to feel the sting of criticism, the weight of someone's disappointment, the pull of someone else's anxiety. That's not a flaw, that's biology. That's the human nervous system doing what it was built to do. But you are not just your amygdala. You have a prefrontal cortex. You have the capacity for evaluation, for discernment, for asking, wait, does this person actually know me? Do they have my well-being in mind? Would I ever seek their counsel? You have the ability to distinguish between information and invasion. You have the right to have an inner council, a small, curated group of voices that you allow to genuinely shape how you see yourself, and to hold the volume down on everyone else. You have the neurological and moral permission to protect your internal world. Not because you're superior to anyone, not because you're beyond criticism, but because your energy is not infinite, your well-being is not optional, and not every voice, no matter how loud, no matter how persistent, no matter how certain it sounds, has earned access to your interior life. Choose who you let in. Choose carefully, and then give everything you have to the people and the work and the life that actually deserve it. Thank you.